At just 19 years old, Clara Bennett stood on the threshold of international stardom. A gifted soprano with a voice that silenced rooms and moved seasoned critics to tears, she was the crown jewel of the prestigious Westmore Academy of Music. Offers from opera houses in New York, Chicago, and even Vienna were beginning to pour in. For a young woman from a modest home in Oakdale, Connecticut, the future sparkled with promise, but all of that changed with one unexpected phone call. Her father had suffered a massive stroke. With her mother long gone and no siblings to help, Clara faced a decision most people would never understand. The next morning, instead of boarding a flight to Milan for a scholarship audition, she drove 25 miles to the nearest hospital and never looked back. For years, neighbors and former classmates would wonder, what happened to the girl with the golden voice? Rumors circulated, maybe she'd burned out, maybe she wasn't good enough after all. But the truth was simpler and far more courageous. She had chosen family. In a culture that often celebrates ambition above all else, Clara's decision flew in the face of conventional success. While her peers chased Grammys and global tours, she learned to manage feeding schedules, physical therapy appointments, and late-night emergency room runs. She married, had children, and quietly folded music into the corners of her everyday life, singing lullabies, leading PTA holiday concerts, and humming to herself as she packed school lunches. Many would see her as someone who gave up a dream, but to Clara the choice was never about giving something up. It was about choosing someone, her father, and later her own family. Today she doesn't regret the applause that faded or the stage lights that never shone on her. She sees fulfillment in her daughter's smile, in the garden she sings to, and in the quiet confidence of a life lived on her own terms. On paper, Clara Bennett lives an ordinary American life. She wakes up before sunrise in her cozy 3-bedroom home in Oakdale, Connecticut, packs lunches with care, and sees her 2 kids off to school with a kiss and a gentle reminder to be kind. Her husband, Daniel, heads to work at the local insurance firm, and she begins her day folding laundry, tending to a backyard garden, and managing the never-ending rhythm of suburban family life. But behind the quiet routines lies a world few truly know. Clara wasn't always a stay-at-home mom. 15 years ago, she was one of the brightest vocal talents at the Westmore Academy of Music, destined for opera houses and concert halls. Her voice could fill a 2,000-seat theater and leave audiences breathless. But when her father suffered a sudden stroke, Clara made the decision to step away from the spotlight. The applause faded, but something deeper took its place. She found music in the everyday moments, in the hum of the dishwasher, in the soft melody she sang while rocking her infant daughter to sleep, in the harmonies of wind chimes swaying on the porch during a late spring breeze. She never sought fame. She found joy in connection, purpose in care, and meaning in simplicity. Her life isn't marked by accolades or press cover. It's measured in birthday cupcakes baked from scratch, in hand-sewn Halloween costumes, in evenings spent reading aloud by lamplight. Friends and neighbors know her as kind, thoughtful, always ready with a listening ear or a warm casserole when someone falls ill. The local librarian knows she checks out piano music just for fun. The elementary school choir director knows she has perfect pitch, but never brags about it. Clara's story is a quiet one, not because it lacks impact, but because it's grounded in love that doesn't need a stage. In a world that often confuses noise for value, Clara reminds us that some of the most meaningful legacies are built in the margins, between morning routines and bedtime songs, between sacrifices made and love freely given. It was just another quiet Tuesday afternoon in Oakdale, Connecticut. Clara Bennett had just picked up the mail, mostly bills, grocery coupons, and a reminder for her daughter's dentist appointment, when she noticed it. A cream-colored envelope, thick and elegant, sealed with gold-embossed initials, W.A.M. Her heart skipped. Westmore Academy of Music. She hadn't heard from them in 15 years, not since the day she walked away from her scholarship, her instructors, and a promising career as one of the school's most gifted vocalists. At just 19, Clara had been considered a prodigy. Her performances moved critics and professors alike. Her future was supposed to be stages and standing ovations. But after her father's stroke, she'd chosen a different path. one paved with family dinners, music recitals in school gyms, and bedtime lullabies, rather than curtain calls. She opened the envelope with trembling hands. Inside, a formal invitation. The Board of Directors of the Westmore Academy of Music requests the honor of your presence at the 25th Anniversary Gala, celebrating a generation of excellence in vocal performance. Clara sat down at the kitchen table, stunned. Her name hadn't appeared in any recital programs in over a decade. She hadn't set foot inside a concert hall in years. Why now? Why her? Her husband Daniel entered the room and immediately noticed the change in her face. "Everything okay?" he asked. "It's a gala," Clara replied, her voice soft. "They want me to attend, Westmore." After all this time, she expected him to ask why she'd even consider it. Instead, he said simply, "You should go." Clara hesitated. She wasn't the young prodigy anymore. She hadn't worn a gown in years, and her voice, while still strong, had only echoed off kitchen walls and school auditoriums. But something stirred inside her. Not ambition, not nostalgia, something more powerful. The desire to reconnect with a part of herself she had lovingly tucked away. As the sun dipped behind the trees outside, Clara placed the invitation on the mantel and looked at it for a long time. This wasn't just a gala, it was a door, one she thought had long been closed, creaking open once more, and maybe, just maybe, it was time to walk through it. Clara Bennett stood just outside the grand entrance of the Manhattan Ballroom, her hands slightly trembling as she smoothed the vintage beige dress she had pulled from the back of her closet. It had been years since she'd worn formal attire, this one purchased for a cousin's wedding, not for an evening among the elite of the classical music world. Inside, glittering chandeliers bathed the room in gold, waiters in tuxedos weaved through crowds of donors, critics, and performers whose names filled concert programs across the country. Clara wasn't sure why she had come. Part of her still questioned the decision even as her heels clicked across the polished floor. Conversations dimmed slightly when she entered, subtle glances thrown her way, polite curiosity tinged with judgment. After all, she had been the girl who walked away, the prodigy who vanished. Then came Victor Langford. He had once been her peer, her equal. Now, he was the newly named artistic director of the National Symphony Orchestra, commanding both admiration and attention. When he saw Clara, his smile was polite but cutting. "The prodigy returns," he said, voice just loud enough for others nearby to hear. "Tell me, Clara, what have you been doing with all that potential?" Around them, a small circle formed, some curious, others clearly waiting for entertainment. Clara met his gaze calmly. "I've been living my life," she replied, her voice steady, "raising a family, building something real." Victor chuckled, swirling his champagne. How quaint! The contempt in his tone didn't go unnoticed. Former classmates, critics, even professors she'd once admired nodded subtly as if silently confirming what had long been assumed. Clara had wasted her talent, and in that moment, beneath the high ceilings and heavy judgment, she felt the full weight of her absence from their world. But she also felt something else, strength. She stood straighter, her hands no longer trembling. These people saw a woman who had walked away. What they didn't see was what she had walked toward, a life of love, sacrifice, and authenticity. She hadn't come for their applause. She came for herself. And if they thought they could shame her back into silence, they had underestimated Clara Bennett. The grand hall fell silent as the spotlight found Clara Bennett. Her heart pounded beneath her simple beige dress, but her face remained calm, composed. She hadn't stood on a stage in over 15 years, not since she'd traded concert halls for school lunchboxes, standing ovations for bedtime stories. Now, under a crystal chandelier and the judgmental gaze of hundreds, she was being asked to sing, not invited really, but challenged, as if her absence from the limelight had invalidated her worth. Victor Langford, standing smugly beside the stage, extended his hand, like a game show host preparing for a punchline. "One song, Clara," he said, "unless, of course, you can't." The room held its breath. Clara stepped forward, took the microphone, and nodded to the young pianist. "Oh mio babino caro," she whispered, an aria both haunting and beautiful, a piece that demanded vulnerability, control, and soul. The first note floated through the hall, soft, clear, unwavering. Whispers stopped. Heads turned. Her voice, once thought lost to domestic life, filled the room with a richness that seemed impossible after so many silent years. But it wasn't just her technical skill, the perfect pitch, the breath control, the phrasing. It was the story inside the sound. Each note carried weight. Her father's final days, the quiet joy of motherhood, the sacrifices no one applauded. She sang not to impress, but to express, to share a life lived in full color, though offstage. By the time she reached the aria's emotional peak, something had shifted. Critics lowered their notepads. Alumni, once skeptical, now leaned forward, visibly moved. Even Victor Langford's smirk faded, replaced by something like awe, or maybe regret. When she sang the final note, the hall froze in stillness. Then, like a wave, the audience rose to their feet in thunderous applause. Not out of politeness, but in reverence. That night, Clara Bennett didn't just sing a song. She reclaimed her story. She reminded everyone in that room, and perhaps herself, that greatness doesn't disappear. It evolves. It deepens. And when it finally returns, it speaks not just with talent, but with truth. For years, Clara Bennett lived in quiet obscurity. She wasn't on magazine covers or headlining concert halls. She wasn't listed on playbills or followed by critics. Instead, she was known in Oakdale, Connecticut as a kind neighbor, a devoted mother, a woman who volunteered for the school choir and baked pies for church events. Her remarkable voice, once described as angelic by Westmore Academy's faculty, had long faded from public memory until one unforgettable night changed everything. When Clara took the stage at Westmore's 25th anniversary gala, most in the audience expected nostalgia at best, embarrassment at worst. Some didn't even remember her name. She had been written off as a footnote, a talent that disappeared. But when she sang, those assumptions shattered. Her performance wasn't just technically masterful, it was emotionally searing. She didn't sing to impress, she sang with the lived experience of someone who had loved deeply, lost greatly, and grown quietly. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Seasoned musicians, once skeptical, stood in stunned applause. Critics exchanged wide-eyed glances. Even the board members of the New York Philharmonic whispered about upcoming showcases and guest features. She had reminded them of something many had forgotten, that music is more than perfection, it's truth in sound. Victor Langford, who had once dismissed her with thinly veiled sarcasm, approached her afterward with a softened tone. "I had no idea you still possessed such brilliance," he said. "There are opportunities, connections. I'd be happy to help." But Clara smiled gently. She didn't need validation from the same system that once overlooked her. What mattered wasn't the applause, it was what the applause symbolized. That her voice, long tucked away in kitchens and lullabies, still held power, still moved people, still mattered. Late recognition is bittersweet. It doesn't erase the years of silence, nor does it return the chances lost. But it affirms something essential, that talent, like truth, doesn't expire. It simply waits for the moment someone finally listens. Clara walked away from that evening with more than offers. She walked away with clarity. She didn't need to chase a spotlight. She only needed to honor her gift, on her terms, in her own time. And finally, the world had listened. Clara Bennett didn't leave the Westmore Gala with a record deal, a management contract, or plans for a world tour, and that was exactly how she wanted it. The standing ovation had been unexpected. The offers from prestigious orchestras and conservatories had been flattering, but as she looked out over the glittering skyline of Manhattan that night, one truth became crystal clear. She didn't want to reclaim her old life. She wanted to reimagine it. 2 months later, on a quiet street in downtown Oakdale, Clara stood in a newly renovated storefront. The sign in the window read, "Turner Vocal Studio." Inside, the smell of fresh paint lingered. There were no chandeliers, no velvet curtains, no grand stages, just a small upright piano, a few chairs and shelves lined with sheet music. And yet, for Clara, It felt like a sanctuary. Twice a week, she welcomed students of all ages. Curious 9-year-olds with big voices, shy teens looking for confidence, retirees finally pursuing dreams long set aside. She taught more than scales and technique. She taught presence, storytelling, emotional truth. Her lessons weren't about perfection, they were about connection. On her desk sat 2 items: a framed review from the Westmore Gala praising her performance as a voice of rare emotional clarity, and a composition notebook filled with her own unfinished songs, melodies inspired by motherhood, sacrifice, and joy. She was no longer singing for critics or applause. She was creating again, teaching again, and finally sharing the music that had lived within her all along. One afternoon, her daughter Emily sat at the studio piano, struggling with a passage from a new song she'd written. "Can you help me with this part, Mom?" she asked. Clara smiled, sat beside her, and hummed the melody. It wasn't a world stage, but it was a moment of legacy, a mother passing down not just skill but passion. Clara had once thought she left music behind forever, but in truth, it had simply taken a different form, and now she was walking a new path, one paved with purpose, community, and quiet fulfillment. Clara Bennett's story reminds us that life doesn't follow a single melody. Many of us, especially in our later years, carry dreams we set aside, careers paused for family, passions put on hold for practicality, and yet, those dreams don't disappear. Like a favorite song we haven't heard in years, they remain quietly waiting, ready to return when we're ready to listen. The most powerful lesson from Clara's journey is this: it's never too late to rediscover a part of yourself. Whether it's picking up an old instrument, writing that first page, or finally learning to paint, the time we believe we've lost often becomes the wisdom we bring back to our craft. Recognition may come late, applause may fade, but the fulfillment of living authentically, of honoring your gifts on your own terms, lasts far longer than any spotlight. For those in their 60s, 70s, or beyond, Clara's path offers more than nostalgia. It offers hope. You haven't missed your chance. You've simply been gathering the life experience that makes your second act even more meaningful. So, dust off the piano, open that notebook, and let your voice, whatever form it takes, be heard.